about Brazil, it's in Latin America in general. People in Ukraine are perhaps not so familiar. So we have, in Latin America, has a population of 650 million people. That is about double the size of Europe. And the combined GDP, gross domestic product, of $5.7 trillion, almost $6 trillion. So Brazil is about a third of Latin America. We have a third of Latin American population, 211 million people. And we have a third of Latin American GDP, so we have $1.85 trillion. So is a big picture. Our GDP is now ninth biggest in the world after France and Italy. We have received traditionally huge flows of foreign direct investment, around 70 to 80 billion per year. In the 12 months going up to March, we received $88 billion in foreign investment. We have a very big economy, as you know. We have trade around $200 billion, 110 exports, 85 imports. We have a surplus of $25 billion. So we are doing very okay. Obviously, we could grow faster, and we are trying to look at reforms, just as Ukraine is, to make our economy grow faster. But in any case, it's interesting to know that of the 500 biggest multinationals in the world, 430 are in Brazil. And we ourselves, we have our own multinationals, as Natalia mentioned. We have, for example, which I think is very well known, Embraer, which is the third largest producer of commercial aircraft in the world, after Airbus and Boeing, or Boeing Airbus. We have Petrobras, a huge oil company. We have JBS, which is the biggest meat producer in the world, with operations in the US, Canada, Australia, South America, and many other countries. We have Vale do Rio Doce, one of the biggest mining companies in the world. So I think we have a lot of potential, and I think for too long we have been apart. So historically, Ukraine was part of Russian Empire, then was part of the Soviet Union. Brazil, as part of Latin America, was very much integrated into trade with the US and Europe. During the Cold War, we were apart for natural reasons. But everything changed, I think, after the end of the Soviet Union. Ukraine became independent, and it's very interesting to know, and we should tell this to people so that they recognize what has been done before, that I think Ukraine was very fast and very agile in starting relations with Brazil. Already in '93, embassy was created. '95, President Kuchma did his first visit. There was a big trade agreement signed. Our President Fernando Henrique came to Ukraine in 2002. In 2003, President Kuchma came again. We signed a very important space agreement. In 2009, we had a strategic partnership. So we were doing very well. Now, what has happened? With the Russian aggression, the conflict in Donbass, there was a deep recession in Ukraine. And unfortunately, trade, not just with Brazil, with the whole world, went down substantially. And all our trade links were more or less cut. And we have been trying to recover this lost territory. Ukraine has been growing quite well in the last few years, since 2016, especially 2019, 3.5% growth, I imagine. And we were very optimistic that 2020 would be the year where we would really go back to all levels of trade. Fortunately, the pandemic came along. But even so, I think that there's a lot that can be done. So I would basically say that two things happened. You know? First of all, as I said, the recession. The other thing was that after the conflict started with Russia, very understandably, the Ukrainian government felt it had to put all its chips in the partnership with European Union, US, Canada, NATO, which meant that since the Foreign Affairs Ministry is not such a large ministry, all its efforts went into this conflict with Russia and alliance with the West. So it's not any wish to overlook other countries, but this had this inevitable result. And I think that Latin America, Africa, Asia, Middle East became a second or third rate priority. Now, the Vice Foreign Minister was talking about the need to rebalance, the need for economic foreign affairs to really take off. And I think it's very important if we look, and Natalia also was saying this, if we look at the prospects for Ukrainian economy, what we see is that Ukrainian industry, in large part Soviet industry, it produces low-cost, efficient products, but they are not in demand in the West. And where they can be sold, I think is in developing countries. So there's a reason to focus your economic foreign policy in the developing countries. Also, the second very important fact, Ukraine is becoming a big agricultural exporter. And already it is the third largest exporter of food products to European Union after US and Brazil. So as Ukraine exports more and more, what we find is that the big markets are in Asia or in the Middle East. So not in Europe, because Europe is very protectionist in agriculture, and US is a big commodity exporter of its own. So naturally the economic exports, the economic possibilities of exports, of trade, will be going more towards developing countries. So this is the reason why we should look at this with more and more attention in the forthcoming years. Now, I also want to speak a little about what we have been doing lately. Our embassy has been together with MFA and other actors in Ukraine looking at the possibilities. We want to have a meeting of our Intergovernmental Commission in the next few months. Fortunately, we'll have to be by Zoom or Skype, but it's important to do this to finally put an end to 6-7 years of no meetings. And we are looking, from our point of view, and we're also talking to MFA about this, we see 4 big areas where we can cooperate. First is agriculture. Natalia is very correct to say that the fact that Ukraine has a free trade agreement with European Union is very important. We in South America, especially in Mercosur, are having a huge difficulty in signing such an agreement with the European Union, basically because we are very competitive in agriculture, and we know the agricultural lobbies, especially in France, Hungary, Ireland, are dead set against this. So this is a big effort. But while we don't have this agreement, then Ukraine can be a very good partner for us, because as the land sales start to take off, and in the future we imagine foreign companies will be able to buy land, we can bring agribusiness to Ukraine, we can bring investments. As I said, we have some of the largest agricultural agribusiness corporations in the world, so they could come here, invest in Ukraine, not just to sell in Ukraine, but also to sell in Europe. So that's something very important. The second area, which I think is very important, is infrastructure. Now, Ukraine needs to modernize infrastructure in terms of railways, in terms of roads. We have very good construction companies in Brazil. They could be interested to come. Some of these projects are financed by international companies, international banks, etc. And they are interested in coming, and the more competitors, the lower the price, the better for Ukraine. The other thing is we have GE in Brazil, which is able to produce locomotives that Ukraine needs. And we are looking with Ukraine at the possibility of selling these locomotives. The Americans also make them, but we make them and we give better financial conditions for Ukraine than the Americans. Finally, we have, I think, already the Vice Minister talked about information technology. We see huge potential there. We are still starting the process. We are trying to get government bureaus in charge of innovation, information technology to meet, to exchange views, to see where we can compete, where we can cooperate with Ukraine. I think there's a big potential. And lastly, I want to speak about health. Brazil is already a big importer of Ukrainian pharmaceuticals. We have the largest public health service in the world, publicly funded free health service in the world. It's modeled on the British NHC, but we have 200 million population. Great Britain has 50, so we have the largest one in the world. It's very important for us to import cheap medicines, because when you give free treatment, you must really lower your costs. And Ukraine has been exporting these products, and I think there's much more potential. For example, we are importing insulin from Ukraine. Now we're going to have a Ukrainian firm make a factory in Brazil. So, and we can multiply this to vaccines, to, especially in light of COVID, we can cooperate. So these are the areas which I think have a lot of potential, concrete areas, you know. But I think that besides this, I think, as I think Natalia and Vice Minister said, it's very important to increase the knowledge of Brazilians with respect to Ukraine and Ukrainians with respect to Brazil. I think Brazil is quite well known here, maybe not for the right reasons, but anyway, unfortunately, Ukraine is a bit of a mystery to most Brazilians. It has 30 years of independent life only, and many people still think in terms of USSR, Russia, etc. So I agree that we need a very strong effort to talk about Ukraine, what Ukraine is, what it has, what it's doing, you know? And the diaspora can be very useful in this, no? But perhaps we need to do more on this front, and maybe less on the political front, no?